When it comes to zany, over-the-top action, few series come close to rivaling the dominance of the Devil May Cry series. For a long time, in fact, if someone wanted to scratch the very specific itch of performing exaggerated feats of demonic combo strings, it was the only one that could provide relief for such a want. While there was the notable misstep of Devil May Cry 2, the first, third, and fourth entries are generally loved by fans and are still held in high regard to this very day. That said, there's a distinct release gap between the latest entry and the fourth one, which had left things on a distinctly open note.
Hey Dante, will we meet again?
The thing is, they did meet again, and it was great. Devil May Cry 5 is yet another worthy entry that fans by and large are mostly happy with. But considering 4 was released in 2008 and 5 in 2019, that was a long time to wait. And as such, there was an intense level of uncertainty for about a decade. Until the announcement and subsequent release of the fifth entry, fans had gone through a roller coaster of emotions, and the primary culprit was DMC Devil May Cry, an ill-fated attempt at a reboot that threatened to derail what was once thought to be a healthy and clearly unfinished series that had more to do and say with its current cast, story, and mechanics. To truly understand the mindset of a good number of fans, myself included, when they received the news of the reboot, it requires turning back the clock to the year 2010. At this point, it had been roughly 2 years since the last game, and Capcom have not said a word about the next entry. All we had to go on were unsubstantiated rumors. As a result, fans are starting to get anxious. Sure, the ending to 4 was a bit ambiguous, but it was still clearly indicating that there was more to come just based on the amount of unanswered questions. Even for the fans that didn't care about the story, there was still the desire to see the combat mechanics fleshed out even further and put into brand new set pieces and scenarios in conjunction with fresh enemy types, weapons, and abilities. While very fun to play with a suitably low skill floor to draw in newcomers and a comparatively high skill ceiling to satisfy veterans, there were still many avenues with which to expand Nero's abilities in a possible sequel. Not to mention, Dante's new style switching allowed for his entire moveset to be accessible all at once, something that could possibly be even more fun to play around with in a new game with an all-new set of weapons. There was also the disappointment of the levels being recycled for Dante's portion of the game. This gave Devil May Cry 4 a distinctly unfinished feeling, as if there was more planned for the game that they couldn't wrap up in time. Still, this was something that could be fixed with a new installment that fleshed out the mechanics introduced in 4, while feeling like a more complete product in the process. At this point, the future, although uncertain, was still looking bright, because the possibilities were seemingly endless. This all changed when E3 2010 happened. Let me set the mood and recreate my own thoughts for when I first laid eyes on this trailer. Oh hey, Capcom is working on this. It doesn't seem like their usual bag, but let's see how this turns out. Okay, the aesthetic is grimy and the vibe is a bit strange. It's kinda hard to tell how this game will play out exactly, or even what the story will be like, but this looks pretty interesting. Alright, it's a bit weird that this dude has twin handguns and a sword like Dante, but he looks nothing like him, so that's probably just a coincidence, maybe even a cheeky homage.
My name is Dante.
Wait, what? What the fuck? Are you shitting me? I think it's fair to say that at the time, almost no one saw that coming, because aside from the weaponry and demons, there was truly nothing that would have given anyone the impression that this was the next Devil May Cry game until the title drop. Fan reaction ranged from understandably confused to really fucking pissed. What honestly should have been a standalone intellectual property with zero affiliation with Devil May Cry was suddenly rebooting a franchise that absolutely no one thought needed it. This resulted in temperamental fans directing their ire squarely at Ninja Theory, who were hired by Capcom to helm this project. At the time, people didn't know any better and thought Ninja Theory were exclusively to blame for distorting our precious series. Particularly in retrospect, this was completely unfair, because for all intents and purposes, they were just doing their job. Unfortunately, even with that in mind, there was one person in particular that acted as the face of the company during this time, and his behavior was, shall we say, not the best. Tameem Antoniades is one of the founders of Ninja Theory and is the primary creative lead on the majority of the team's projects, such as Heavenly Sword, Enslaved, and the DMC reboot itself. Anyone even passively aware of what was happening with the reboot had heard about how poorly Tameem handled himself. He had disparaging remarks about fans and made ridiculous comments about the original series, which painted him as both callous and arrogant. All that said, I'm going to play devil's advocate and argue that his behavior was at the very least understandable when you consider the position he was in. Imagine putting yourself in his shoes for a moment. You're one of the heads of a fairly sizable video game company, which by and large are notoriously expensive to keep running. On top of paying rent, you have over 100 employees, most of which are being paid high salaries. This adds up really quickly and becomes especially difficult to maintain if the products aren't selling. Neither Heavenly Sword nor Enslaved met their sales expectations or broke even. While I can't say this with the utmost certainty, I think it is safe to say that the studio was hemorrhaging money as a result. So when a huge company like Capcom swoops in and says, "Hey, we like your games. We want you guys to make the next installment in our multi-million-dollar Devil May Cry franchise." Considering the tough spot they were in, I imagine they didn't have the luxury to decline, even if they wanted to. What many people don't know is that Ninja Theory originally didn't even want to stray too far from the familiarity of the original series. It was actually Capcom who forced their hand and instructed them to make something wildly different. With all this in mind, despite some of the dumb shit Tameem has said, Ninja Theory is not entirely to blame for how the game turned out. At the end of the day, they were just doing what Capcom wanted them to do, and yet it was Ninja Theory receiving all the death threats from fans over something they realistically had little control over. If I was Tameem, I'd also be upset and defensive. This of course doesn't excuse his actions, and he did say some things that made me raise an eyebrow more than once. But again, it makes some sense given the circumstances. Now, there's much to be said about DMC Devil May Cry itself, and we'll get to it. But beyond the trailer looking very unappealing to fans of the series, I believe that the underlying frustration comes more so from brand confusion. Simply put, the question of whether or not the original series would ever get a proper continuation was now up in the air. Did the creation of this reboot mean that the original series was completely dead and that this was going to be the future of the franchise? That, more than anything else, is what shook fans like myself to their core. Because as mentioned before, there was still plenty of untapped potential just waiting to be unleashed. But now it seemed like it was being squandered in favor of a new direction that many fans were displeased with. The decision to reboot Devil May Cry came across as a slap in the face, as if Capcom didn't respect the integrity of the franchise, and that they could just haphazardly graft the brand onto something else and expect it to sell. While it is tempting to move forward with this narrative as if it were the truth, in reality this wasn't entirely the case. Based on an interview with Hideaki Itsuno, the director of Devil May Cry 3, 4, and 5, the decision was born from a desire to keep the series relevant by injecting it with new life and bringing in a new audience. But this then also created the perception that Capcom were turning their backs on the fans that made the series successful in the first place, even if that may have not necessarily been the intention. What's strange about all of this though is that Devil May Cry 4 sold well, very well. It's one of the best-selling entries in the series, in fact. Yet, despite that, there was still this desire to keep the series from dying, which raises concerns as to what exactly Capcom's perception of the series was. It's important to remember that around this time, Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare had also released and was doing insane numbers, the likes of which the video game industry had never seen before. While Devil May Cry was clearly popular and well liked, it was never going to do Call of Duty numbers. And while I can't say anything definitively, this does seem to be where the desire to reboot the series came from, to appeal to the same individuals buying copies of Modern Warfare at the truckload. The obvious issue here is that no matter how you dress it up, a goofy dude running around slashing up demons was never going to be the mainstream hit a military shooter was. The appeal is a little too specific and not at all in line with what the general gaming landscape had become interested in at the time, which was gritty realism. This unfortunately leads us to another rather discomforting conversation, wherein the 7th generation saw the rise of a borderline xenophobic trend of shitting on Japanese games. In fairness, there was in fact a glut of poor quality anime games that were seemingly made to appeal to the lowest common denominator of degenerate otaku types. This contributed to the idea that Japan was out of touch and no longer understood what appealed to the Western market. There were, of course, still some fantastic Japanese games being produced, like the Tales of series, Valkyria Chronicles, Persona 4, and many others. But the deluge of low-tier trash was hard to ignore. I think the reason why this sentiment started popping up, because at this point more than ever, video games were trying to grow up, so to speak, and many Japanese games tended to be very silly, and even more egregious, unabashedly gamey. This unfortunately led to misguided attempts at mature storytelling, such as the hilariously inept Heavy Rain.
How can I forget that my 2 sons died because of me? I loved them more than anything in the world. But I couldn't protect them.
I want you to give me a child.
Fucking hell. Given the critical acclaim it undeservedly garnered, it was absolute gutter trash like this leading the charge of what games should be moving forward. And while there's nothing inherently wrong with striving for subtle, nuanced, and mature storytelling in games, the hack pseudo-auteur David Cage sure as hell was not the person to be following the example of. And Devil May Cry was absolutely not the series to do anything like that with. This is a gamey ass series. It's all about flashy combat and irreverent humor. Trying to mold it into something gritty and mature just didn't make much sense. But this was the direction the industry was headed in. Capcom thought by hiring a developer that had created some action games with decent narratives, they could just magically make it all work. With all that being said, how did the game itself turn out? Well, not as bad as expected, but not especially great either. To be clear, it is not my intention for this to be a full-blown critique of DMC Devil May Cry, but suffice to say what we got was kind of a mess. After the backlash, it seemed that Capcom got cold feet, fearing that they would lose their core audience. It comes across as if Ninja Theory were then instructed to scrap their more ambitious concepts in order to bring the game closer to the style of the original games. The end result is something that lacked the originality of what was shown in the initial E3 trailer, but also failed to capture the magic of the original series. A strange middle ground that is both too similar, yet not similar enough, bordering on ill-conceived parody. When I first played through the reboot, I had very mixed feelings towards it. The fan in me didn't like it at all, but when I detached myself from my love for the series, found that there were in fact positive qualities. While most of the story and writing was pretty awful, there were some good and funny moments. Combat, while flawed, had some interesting stuff going for it, and the level design in particular was fairly strong, even beyond the distinct visual style. Admittedly, after I saw the credits roll with an obvious sequel bait at the end, I couldn't help but feel my heart sink. I knew and understood that good, hard-working people had poured years of their life into this game. Yet, despite that, I wanted it to fail, just for the possibility that my Devil May Cry could come back. I didn't want this to be the future of the series. I realized how wrong that was, because it meant that these individuals' jobs would be in jeopardy were that to happen. But I just did not want this to be how the series moved forward. This wasn't my Devil May Cry. It was something else that held little appeal for me. Wrong or not, I got what I wanted, sort of. The reboot had indeed underperformed, but this also meant that the series went dormant for a while. I was starting to think maybe I was wrong to wish for this outcome. At least there was some fun to be had with the reboot. A sequel would have been something, rather than what we currently had, which was nothing. Thankfully, Capcom did throw us a bone with two re-releases, DMC Devil May Cry Definitive Edition and Devil May Cry 4 Special Edition. If the vanilla release was a decent game with good ideas but flawed execution, then the Definitive Edition manages to turn it into a pretty solid title. Well, at least as far as the combat is concerned. The cutscenes remained largely unchanged, which is understandable because trying to fix them would require rewriting the entire thing anyways. That said, I think we could have at least done without this scene, you know? Ugh, fuck you. Thankfully, one of the best possible outcomes of events is what we ended up with. As mentioned before, Devil May Cry 5 was released to critical acclaim and a sly hint at a possible Devil May Cry 6, which is all fans ever wanted. Not to mention, Ninja Theory were able to get back on their feet with the absolutely excellent Hellblade Senua's Sacrifice, which is far and away the best title Ninja Theory has ever crafted. Despite all the hatred the reboot received, it did have its fans, and while I'm sure those people would have preferred the reboot to have gotten a sequel instead, I genuinely feel that it's better for Ninja Theory themselves to have struck out on their own, as opposed to relying on IPs that aren't their own. I've spent a lot of time being upset with the reboot for derailing one of my favorite franchises of all time. But nowadays, I can look back on it with a strange sense of fondness. I still find the writing unbearably obnoxious and the art style a bit too ugly for my tastes, but the level design and combat in the Definitive Edition are genuinely well crafted. Mechanically, it isn't on the level that I've come to expect from Hideaki Itsuno and his team, but when compared to the combat systems of most other games in its genre, it actually fares quite well. After getting what I wanted from Devil May Cry 5, it's much easier for me to accept the reboot for what it is. A flawed and arguably misguided, but ultimately fascinating merger of Western and Japanese design philosophies. I guess what I'm trying to say is, I forgive DMC Devil May Cry. This has been your humble analyst Daniel, and I hope to see you all again next time.